You learn so much about yourself when you push yourself in sports, primarily because in a lot of sports, there is no like set way. There is no one path to success. Very often there is no coach who can help you, right? Like if it's something more defined like tennis or basketball, that's different. But with a solo sport, it's very much on your own and it's self-discovery. And I had to be independent in like a new way for the first time, more so than grad school.
Is there anything else you want to touch on if someone wanted to build a better physique?
You can start whenever you want. You know, a lot of people will say something like, I'm too old, I'm too busy, I have a job, right? But, you know, like, look at me, right? I was never fat. I'll give you that disclaimer. But I went from just, you know, a tech nerd to a professional athlete in my 30s, which is considered incredibly old for an athlete. You can make a change. You can improve your lifestyle. You can improve your body. You can improve your health like at any time point. Improve what you eat. You'll actually look better. You'll feel better. And then for the working out part, if you're going to start working out, I always recommend to join a gym and then to find a qualified person to help you the first couple of times. Right. Nothing more demotivating than joining a gym and getting hurt immediately. Then you're going to think, oh man, you know, fitness is not for me. I shouldn't exercise. What advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah. And what about you? What advice would you give to your younger self, younger Emily?
You know, I mean, I hate to say this because it doesn't sound very respectful, but I would say do what you want and not what you think will make your parents happy. You know, that's a hard one though, because you never want to tell someone to like be disrespectful to their parents, right? But I think, you know, powerlifting was the first thing that I wanted to do for myself, and I wanted it independent of what anyone else wanted from me. But since no one else wanted it from me, I was completely on my own. But having to do it on my own actually forced me to, like I said, like get to know myself. And it forced me to grow up on another level. So I feel, you know, it made me grow, not just as like an athlete, but as, you know, an independent person, as a thinker, as a problem solver. So the internal change for me was far bigger than the external change.
Hey guys, thank you so much for following this channel and making our podcast into the top 3% global podcast ranking. When I started a year ago, I didn't think anyone would listen to this podcast, but it was you who made this a success. Now, before you watch the full video, please do me a small favor. Please hit the subscribe button to help me understand a bit more about your experiences and how we can improve our contents. In every video, I have a deep conversation with someone whom I've recently met. We talked about different topics, including mental health, mindset, entrepreneurship, career, and most importantly, their stories on how they transform themselves from the younger self. I hope these conversations are useful to you and can bring you new perspectives. Please enjoy.
Hey, Emily, welcome. It's great to have you here. You're actually the second pole athlete that I have on this podcast here. My first one was Angel Wong. She was the first Hong Kong gymnast who made it to the Olympics a few years back. So it's good to have you here. You have a super interesting background. I read from a recent interview, you had a bit of a crisis around 30, and you turned from an engineer to a world record holder in powerlifting. So really humbled to have you here, and we'd love to check out your story and, you know, what made you become who you are today. Welcome to the show.
Aaron. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we just kick off with a bit of introduction about yourself? You know, tell us about, you know, who you are and how you become the person you are today.
Sure. So my name is Emily Hu. I'm an American-born Taiwanese, child of Taiwanese immigrants in Silicon Valley. So I don't know, Aaron, are you still in Asia or are you in Australia these days?
I'm based in Hong Kong right now.
Okay, you're in Hong Kong. So yeah. I don't know if you know the stereotypes of like Asian American, like second generation kids. We get so much pressure from our parents to live out the dreams that they wanted. So I think from a very young age, I knew that life was going to be like academics and getting a very steady job. And I managed to do pretty well there. I went to a good university. I went to Duke. I got a master's in engineering. And then I worked in biotech. And, you know, like, oh, that was pretty good for like an Asian perspective. But then on like the eve of my 29th birthday, I remember thinking, oh man, is this it? Am I just going to be in a cubicle working hard for like the foreseeable future, like in the same cubicle? And then I kind of had a crisis, like you just mentioned. I remembered as a kid, my mom wanted me to focus on school so much that she said, you know, no distractions. Don't do sports. Don't do this. Don't go out too much. And not competing in sports was really big for my mom because she thought it was kind of like extraneous and not helpful to education. But as a kid, I mean, you grow up in the American culture. Americans kind of worship jocks. So I remember thinking like sports were so cool. And then we watched the Olympics. So I'm jealous of your last pro athlete guest. If I could have been an Olympian in gymnastics, I think I would pick that instead. But I remember thinking, oh man, like here I am. I'm an adult. School is over. Adult life is kind of set and boring, and I don't want it to be that way. I just feel like there's all these things that if I had a second chance to be young again, and if I didn't have parents that I didn't want to disappoint, I probably would have done more things. So I think on top of that was get really good at a sport and compete in it. Yeah. And, when you are approaching 30, you can't do a lot of sports because you're just kind of old. But I always felt like I was pretty good in the gym. I was pretty strong. So I lifted weights, and then it really helped get a lot of stress out from like the workday. So I just remember as I got older, I got stronger, and I felt pretty strong. So I thought, those people who do those strongman competitions on ESPN, they're pretty cool. So I want to try that. I'm going to try a powerlifting competition because I like the idea of one rep maxing. And I did. The year I turned 30, I quit that biotech job. I traveled a little bit. I volunteered abroad, a lot of the things that people do during quarter life crises. But then I entered a powerlifting competition, and it was my first time competing as an athlete. It was my first time really actually training for an event. And I did the competition, and not only did I win, but I broke every state record. So that felt really good, and I just continued it from there, and the rest is history.
That's pretty amazing, coming from someone who didn't have a powerlifting background, right? But I also came across that you are a bit of a gymnast, and you also did a bit of martial arts, right? When you were young, are you still doing them?
I don't do martial arts anymore, and I'm way too old, and now I'm too bulky for gymnastics. But that was my first love. If I could have been a collegiate gymnast, I would have greatly preferred that. I don't think I had the body type or the talent, and as a kid, I definitely didn't have the discipline. But both activities gave me a really good foundation to be a pretty good weightlifter. Yeah. No, super interesting. So are you doing? Do you have like a dual career? Are you still in sort of the biotech engineering space, or have you completely transformed into a different career these days? So, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if I have a dream career, but now I have two careers. So it's kind of interesting. Unfortunately, in the States, like outside of like the NBA and like football, professional sports do not pay very well, especially not for women. So I'm a professional powerlifter now. And 3 years after starting, I broke a bunch of world records. Yeah. And being like number one gets you some sponsorships. But even when you win a lot, the prize money is so bad that the whole time I've always kept my corporate job. So I've always done this alongside of a job. And the job has always been like biotech or engineering related.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you've got a day job and you powerlift at night.
Yeah, so I have like a day persona and a night persona.
Yeah. Hey, and also noticed that you made your appearance on a reality TV show.
Oh, yeah.
You were invited by Dwayne Johnson on the Titan Games. How was that experience for you?
Oh, man. So it was the most unique and maybe the worst experience of my life. I had like full intention to reject the offer when they reached out to me and they asked if I wanted to do the show. I have no ambitions of like being famous or being on TV. I'm like not that type of person. I'm actually kind of shy about those things. And I don't do well under that kind of pressure. So I just knew it was going to be like very stressful. But a few friends of mine encouraged me because they said, you probably won't get this opportunity ever again. It'll be like a very interesting story. It's going to be a very unique experience. So I did it. But the whole time it was very stressful and not in the ways you think it would be. Like with reality TV, they don't tell you anything that's going on and they just kind of throw you in there. I didn't know when I was competing. I didn't know against who. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know like what day or time it would be. Just one evening at like 10 p.m. they said, okay, you're going.
And where did they shoot it?
They shot it in LA, and most people don't know this, but these type of reality TV sporting events, they're shot in the middle of the night because there's too much light pollution otherwise. So I think I competed at 10 p.m. and then the people after me kept going until about 2 a.m.
Jeez, that really screwed up your routine and your schedule.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I choked because I was so tired. But not surprisingly, the military people did pretty well because they're very well trained to be able to go whenever.
Yeah. So would you ever do it again?
I mean, probably, quite frankly, but I would complain the whole time.
Yeah. I watched a video last night. It was quite impressive.
It was very tiring.
Hey, you mentioned you are the second generation of American Taiwanese who, I guess, migrated to the States, right? And you also touched on some of the external pressure you got from your parents. How do your parents view this transition and sort of seeing you having this sort of two careers going in parallel at the moment?
Oh man, they think I've lost my mind. So when I first started doing this, both of my parents said, "Why would you do this? You have a great job, you have a great education. Like, why would you distract yourself?" You know, Asian parents, they always say stuff like, don't do anything that would risk your job. Like, why would you distract yourself and risk your job? And even when I was winning and having a great time, they would say, "Well, that's great, but like, don't risk your career for like a hobby." So, I think they're very like practical, pragmatic people. And they grew up in a time when you couldn't have hobbies, right? Because sometimes survival was questionable. Like Taiwan was a pretty poor place like 50 years ago. So I think they still live in that mindset. So they're always concerned that, if I lift too much, then I won't have time to work. And then maybe I'll lose my job. And then, homelessness arises.
Yeah. And has their perspective changed? I mean, seeing the transformation in you, seeing you appearing on, reality TV and breaking, multiple world records now?
I think it finally turned around when I got a job at Google. Because, I think for most Asians, Google is like the pinnacle if you're an engineer. So then I turned professional in powerlifting. And then immediately after I got a job at Google. And then my mom was like, "Okay, you probably have your life under control if Google will hire you."
What attracted you to Google?
They build some pretty cool stuff. Like they work on really outlandish projects, and when they work out, they're pretty cool.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk about your book. Congratulations, by the way. I noticed that you recently published your book, and it's
congrats on yours too.
Thank you. And for the followers on this show, you guys can go to Amazon and check it out. I just had a look at it. Over 40 ratings, perfect ratings, 5 out of 5. What is your book about, and why'd you write it?
So my book is it's called like the Smart Simple Guide to a Better Physique. So it's literally that. It's a guidebook for beginners on health, nutrition, exercise, fitness. And so this book isn't intended for professional powerlifters. This book is actually written for like my school and my tech friends. So in the States, when the pandemic hit, the area I lived in had a really strict quarantine, and a lot of people didn't leave their houses for like almost 2 years. So about a year and a half ago, the quarantines started loosening up. And a lot of my friends who were pretty young and healthy going into the pandemic they hadn't left their house or moved in a year and a half. So for the first time ever, they were kind of chubby. And, like the quarantine was lifting, so they were concerned about being overweight. And so I got a lot of requests at the last minute from friends who had never had to think about this before, asking me, "Well, how do I lose weight really quickly? And how do I exercise? How do I get in shape, for the first time? Because it's not automatic now. Like now that I'm in my 30s or 40s, how do I take care of my health?" Yeah. And so, I wrote this book with that in mind.
It's a great book. Everyone should go check it out. And I want to go a bit deeper on each of these topics. Obviously, with an expert yourself. Exercises, diets, and nutrition. Let's talk about exercises. You mentioned about, your tech friends messaging you wanting to lose weight, right? How can exercise help? And what are some of the myths around exercise that you might want to clarify for the audience today?
Well, in general, exercise is very good for longevity. As we get older, we have to think about how our organs, how our body will age. So exercise keeps you aging smoother. Aging will still be kind of rough sometimes. But I think the biggest myth I hear is if you exercise, you can eat whatever you want. This is I know in the States, a lot of people believe that. And a lot of people exercise so they can eat more. And when you're young, that might be okay. There are a lot of like teenagers who do sports and they can eat whatever they want. They're always skinny. But after a certain age, unless you're running a marathon every day, then you can't do that. And if you're running a marathon every day, your body is probably like broken and also hates you. So, you know, a lot of life and like being healthy at an older age is moderation.
Yeah. Everything comes to a balance, right? So are you pro marathon or are you anti-marathon?
Me personally, I don't like running. And, you know, I think if I were to recommend for anyone to run, I would say do it for less than 15 minutes, but run really fast.
Yeah. So obviously I'm not a pro athlete like yourself. I do have a similar perspective. I do believe that everything in life is about balance. I mean, if you look at extreme sports, I think a lot of people are doing extreme sports for the wrong reason, for, you know, breaking records or, you know, trying to beat their own ego. So personally, I try to go and exercise like 2 to 3 times a week. So I look for consistency over the year, rather than doing this one-off preparation for a marathon that I'm trying to do. It sounds like you have a similar perspective on this as well. Powerlifting. Should anyone go into powerlifting? What's your advice there?
Well, so powerlifting is definitely not moderation. So I don't specifically recommend that in this book. If you're a beginner, you don't have to powerlift. I find it really fun. I think for me, the harder I push myself in certain ways, just like the more rewarding it feels, right? But I get that for some people that may feel like way too taxing on their body. But for other people, it's just really fun. So I like the workouts of powerlifting. I think the competition aspect can be pretty involved. So I don't recommend it for everyone.
Yeah. Hey, I can imagine the journey of transitioning from your corporate career into this hobby, as you put it, or heavy lifting must have been quite challenging. I would expect it wasn't a smooth transition, right?
Yeah, it felt like it's interesting. Like I defined it as it felt like growing up a second time, because it felt like getting to know myself all over again.
Yeah.
You know, like grad school is hard, engineering's hard, right? But with education, the path to success is very well defined and it's set up for you. All you gotta do is like work hard to follow the steps. But to go from like an adult to a pro athlete, there are like in a pro athlete in powerlifting, there are no defined steps. Like nobody can tell you what to do. And, you know, I didn't know any other female powerlifters. So it was very much up to me to like figure it out, either hire the right help or to learn things that I didn't already know myself. So like you learn so much about yourself when you push yourself in sports, primarily because in a lot of sports, there is no like set way. There is no one path to success. Very often there is no coach who can help you, right? Like if it's something more defined like tennis or basketball, that's different. But with a solo sport, it's very much on your own and it's self-discovery. And I had to be independent in like a new way for the first time, more so than grad school.
Can you share a bit more your strategy or tactics? How did you find your path? I mean, you mentioned a number of challenges. There's no known path. Especially as a grown-up, after you turn 30-year-old, no one has done it before. You know, what strategies have you used? Maybe routine, goals that you've set for yourself?
Well, so much of life is really like just good luck. It's like being at the right place at the right time. You know, I think had I decided to powerlift at any other time, things could have been so much different. But like I mentioned, I was in this biotech job and I was really just not loving it. So I quit the job. And the recruiter for that company called me and said, "Hey, I heard you quit and we have to backfill your position. Like, what happened?" And I said, "Oh, you know, I want to change. I want to take like a gap year to do some fun things." And then he was like, "Okay, well, what do you have during this time?" And I said, "Well, you know, I've always wanted to compete in a sport, so I want to compete in powerlifting." And at this time, I was very thin. I was like your typical small Asian female. So he said, "You know, that sounds so crazy. You are the skinniest person I know. How are you going to lift anything?" But then he also said, "It's very, very coincidental that you mentioned powerlifting specifically. And then keep in mind, this is 2012, before the sport got popular." He said, "You know, it's so strange you mentioned powerlifting because I know a powerlifter, my best friend from high school, just became the world's strongest powerlifter in his weight class, and he happens to live near you. He's also a personal trainer. Let me give you his phone number so he can help you." And that was the best coincidence of my life. So that guy not only lived one city away from me, but he wanted to build his own gym and his own coaching brand. And he'd just broken all these world records, but he wasn't famous yet. So for this year and this 1 year only, he had time to take like new disciples. And I was his first powerlifter that he trained. So he had all this time for me. Had I met him a year later, he would have been too busy to even be taking clients.
Ah, got you. That's interesting. So like opening up, like, telling other people that what you want to do in life. And, like you said, sometimes, we can't anticipate opportunity. It just happens, right?
Yeah. A lot of people say like, oh, the universe, like when you make your intentions known, but really and truly, I think if you ask people for help, you will receive more help.
Yeah. Yeah. So on exercise, you mentioned look for, I guess, consistency. Competition, powerlifting is not really for everyone. You've touched briefly on watching out what we eat, right? As we age.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that on the nutrition and diet front. What should people be aware of? Are we really what we eat?
More or less, yes. Man, the Western diet is so carb heavy and fatty. So if you want to be healthy, reduce your carbs and reduce how much fat you eat. That's like the first thing. But also, I think people need to be more mindful what they eat. Me personally, I love to eat. I love sweets. I love snacking. That was my main driver for getting into the gym, like in my 20s, because I wanted to also like burn off whatever I ate. I think you get to an age or maybe like a busyness in life where you can't just work off everything you eat. So then you have to be like more mindful about what you eat, and you can't just like eat garbage all the time. So I think really and truly, like, don't eat so much junk.
What does diet look like for you these days?
Diet? Well, I think it's hard. So during the pandemic, the one good thing about the pandemic is I was able to clean up my diet quite a bit. I used to eat out a lot. Eating out is pretty unhealthy, especially in the States where everything's very greasy. But typically, if I'm at home, I'll try to like sway more towards high protein, a lot of vegetables, less added oil. And then at night, sometimes I go out to eat. And I'll just try to keep it normal. If I'm out with friends, I'll just try to eat normal food, but I'll try my best to keep the alcohol consumption low. Yeah. I find that if I keep the alcohol consumption low, then I'm more mindful about what I eat. If I drink cocktails, then my diet's obliterated. I'm just going to eat everything and anything I want. Like the self-control goes away.
Yeah.
So if you really want to lose weight, just cut out all alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to ask you about your ecosystem as well. Because I imagine, I guess, the friends that you were hanging out with, their lifestyle would be quite different back in the day compared to what you have now, right? I guess it sounds like you're more cognizant about, what you eat, I guess what you eat, how often you exercise. Has your ecosystem changed?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as one would expect, now I hang out with mostly fitness people. I would say about 10 years ago, I hung out with just a lot of friends that I knew growing up or like work friends. And most of the social activities I was eating or drinking. And then as I got more serious into lifting, when competition was around and I had to keep my weight low, I couldn't drink alcohol because that hurts my performance. And then I couldn't go out to eat as much. So I just couldn't hang out with them as much. It made me less social in that way. It actually made dating a little bit hard too. But, I met a lot of friends in the gym. And then for a lot of us, our training schedules were very similar. So we'd all have to diet at the same time. So if we went out to eat, we would actually go somewhere healthy and we'd kind of all suffer together at a restaurant and just eat like fish or chicken. So that made it easier because then you're not like the only person not drinking alcohol.
So the law of attraction is true, eh?
Yeah.
I had a similar experiences too. A few years ago, I realized, I started reflecting about the social negativity, where I'm getting most of my negative energy from. And I proactively try to change my ecosystem. I started watching news, for example, for about 3 years now. Just mainly because I haven't been able to learn anything great from the news outlet. Is there anything else you want to touch on if someone wanted to build a better physique?
I think you can start whenever you want. A lot of people will say something like, I'm too old, I'm too busy, I have a job, right? But, like, look at me, right? Like, granted, I was never fat. I'll give you that disclaimer. But I went from just, a tech nerd to a professional athlete in my 30s, which is considered incredibly old for an athlete, right? You can make a change. You can improve your lifestyle. You can improve your body. You can improve your health, like at any time point, right?
Yeah.
So I would say
we need
that
to put up a before and after photo to show the audience.
Yeah, I actually don't have any. But I think anyone can improve their physique, improve their health at any age.
Yeah.
So if you're 50 or 60, yeah, maybe you won't get like a 6-pack abs, but you can still do a lot to benefit your body. So
Yeah.
I don't think people should look at like their age or their current like shape as
a constraint, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
set the right
exactly.
expectations based
Right.
on where you are. And what I mean, obviously, if people are interested, they can check out your book, right? But if people say if they want to do change and have a positive change on their physique, right? Where should they start? I mean, should they do all three? Should they exercise? Do some changes on their diets and in nutritions? And is that sustainable? What would you recommend? How should they change the system and even their mindset, right? How can they approach this?
Yeah. Well, the easiest thing, if you can't do a lot, is to improve your sleep, right? Most people don't sleep enough. And then after that, I would say improve your diet, because most people actually want to lose weight. Most people want to look better. Diet is most of that. At our age, you can't work off a bad diet. So improve what you eat. You'll actually look better. You'll feel better. And then for the working out part, if you're going to start working out, I always recommend to join a gym and then to find a qualified person to help you the first couple of times.
Yeah, just find a PT,
There's
right?
nothing more demotivating than joining a gym and getting hurt immediately. Then you're going to think, oh man, fitness is not for me. I shouldn't exercise.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's spot on. I remember when I first started gym, I used to hire a few PTs to make sure I know what I'm doing. I mean, the machines, they look incredibly easy to use, but they're not. You can get injuries so easily, and
Right.
then it really demotivates you from going back. Hey, thank you for sharing all this wisdom. It's been a great chat, and
Thanks.
getting to know you and just hearing from you how you changed from your your pre 30-year-old self to where you are today is just incredible. And I think it's going to be a very inspiring for a lot of people who are thinking about having a true hobby. So many people we're not doing the things that we're passionate for during the day,
Right.
but I don't think a lot of people are taking enough time to try to build up a hobby or really go out their comfort zone like you did, and
Right.
that's amazing, and that's super interesting. Is there one question? So I started this in the last episode, so I asked all my guests to ask a question for the next guest. So I don't know who my next guest is going to be. There's a few that we are lining up in the pipeline. But what's the one question that you want to ask our next guest?
What advice would you give your younger self?
What advice would you give to your younger self? Yeah. And what about you? What advice would you give to your younger self, younger Emily?
I hate to say this because it doesn't sound very respectful, but I would say do what you want and not what you think will make your parents happy. That's a hard one though, because you never want to tell someone to be disrespectful to their parents, right? But I think, powerlifting was the first thing that I wanted to do for myself, and I wanted it independent of what anyone else wanted for me. But since no one else wanted it for me, I was completely on my own. But having to do it on my own actually forced me to, like I said, get to know myself. And it forced me to grow up on another level. So I feel, it made me grow, not just as an athlete, but as, an independent person, as a thinker, as a problem solver. So the internal change for me was far bigger than the external change.
I'm actually a father of two. I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And a lot of stuff that you just said really resonate with me. And I think it's important, whether you're parents or not, even if you interact with children on a daily basis, I think it's important to help your children build the right virtues rather than trying to map the path for them. Because I think everyone should have their own path, like you said, right?
Right.
And the stuff that you said, after being a grown-up 30-year-old, you have to sort of figure out everything again, and you have no references, all right? You happen to meet the right person at the right time, and that made you, I guess, also motivate you in a way to sort of problem solve, and try to map out, the next step, right? And I don't think a lot of people have that courage, right, to take that first step.
It's very scary the first time, but once you get started, And then if and when you emerge, right, you are a much better version of your old self.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you have your eyes? Sorry, I forgot to ask this earlier. Did you have your eyes to smash these world records? Like,
no.
What was your motivation? Like when you said you wanted to build a hobby, right? You got into powerlifting. Did you have an end goal? Like what was it?
No, I didn't. So in powerlifting, there are 3 events. There is the squat, the bench, the deadlift. I wanted to see how much I could deadlift. And I had never benched before. And I told my coach that I had met through my ex-coworker. I said, I've never benched before. I don't think I'm good at it. I don't want to do it. Can I just compete in the deadlift? And he said, if you want to compete, you have to do everything. Just try the bench, see how it goes. And I remember when I broke that state record, I thought, oh, wow, that's pretty impressive. And then as I kept competing, my bench was the best lift by far, like so much better than the other 3. And I would have never thought that. Like going in, I thought, oh, I'm going to stink at this because I've never bench pressed before. My push-ups aren't good. And it just kept improving so much that I think like I was at like maybe 160 pounds, and that was like the state record. And I said, if I could bench 200 pounds, that'd be pretty good. That'd be really great. And then I got it. And then the all-time world record was 231. And I remember thinking, well, 231 is too much for me. But in the gym, 2 big plates, that's 225. If I could bench 225, that'd be really good. And I'd be happy with that. And then I got that. And then I actually got the world record. And then I kept going and going and going. And every time it wasn't like I was gunning for a goal. It was just, if I could do this next increment, that'd be very nice.
Yeah. Have you got injured before?
Luckily, no big injuries. I've been sore for very, very long time points before. And I thought they were injuries, but luckily no real injuries.
Right. Okay. So in powerlifting, there are 3 types: squat, the deadlift, and also the bench press. So you specialize in bench press and not the other 2, right?
Yeah. And this was like the one thing I thought I was going to stink at and I wanted to avoid. So it's funny how life changes. You can surprise yourself.
Yeah. And this goes back to what you said earlier about this discovering, right? So I'm guessing when you first started off, you sort of experimented all 3, and then you realized, you're actually better in bench press than the other 2, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Emily. So good to have you today and learning so much about you on your book, your mindset about how you broke different world records across different weight classes, your perspectives on exercises, diets, and nutritions. And if anyone is interested, and I strongly recommend it, go check out your book on Amazon. And I'll also include some information in the episode for people to check out.
Awesome.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good day.
You too.